Hey, Minhaaj, how's it going?
Going good. How about you?
Good, thanks. So today on the Data Nerd Herd, we have Minhaaj Rehman from Pakistan. So good to see you. I know we've been trying to coordinate getting together for a show for a while, so glad we could finally make it happen.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. So for people who don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro?
Sure. My name is Minhaj from Pakistan. That was a repetition. But I have a company called SIDA, which is an acronym for Psychometric Data Analysis. I come from a business psychology background. So that's what I bring to the data science field. And I also have studied computational physics in university for quite some time. Um, was an early adopter of technology, someone who is uniquely trained in social science and also data engineering, deploying apps, programming, developing websites, so a little bit about everything. Which probably makes me uniquely qualified to merge those fields. So that's what our company does. So we do a lot of work with organizations, helping applying psychological concepts and observations into their products, go-to-market strategy, as well as helping them deploy apps based on that and creating pipelines of behavioral science.
That's quite the background and quite the intersection. I would say a lot of really cool stuff like psychology, um, engineering, data science. I mean, how did you find yourself on this path? It's not like there's a straightforward path into kind of what you're doing. So
You're right, exactly. There was nothing straightforward about that. One thing I knew for sure is that I was very interested in human behavior from the get-go. Used to study people a lot. I was studying in Sweden for quite some time, and there's a very interesting educational culture that is probably unique to Scandinavian universities, which is instead of focusing too much on academic papers and giving presentations and clerical slide work, then they send you out to different CEOs and VPs. So you go to their organization to find out what their problems were, what their fears were, what they're aiming for, and then you come back home, find academic papers and see if there's something useful in that, and then match it with their real strategy. So it's like you learn to do things by your own hand and finding out if that strategy would work or not. And during this back and forth, you learn a lot because you're already working with CEOs and VPs, which is kind of unique for university students to actually have the opportunity to do. But that's something that I'm really admired doing that. And one of the things that I established during these studies is Swedes are a huge fan of giving everyone the IKEA case studies because that's something they're the most proud of. And this guy who actually started the whole process, Ingvar and Kamprad, so he used to travel on his bike from a suburban city, Stockholm, which is capital of Sweden, if someone doesn't know, and sold matchsticks to the population in Stockholm. What he found out was that it sold expensive. He could buy them cheaper, and he could make a lot of money during this exchange. And one of the things I learned from that is probably business is not about developing great products or making huge investments in marketing. Is probably finding out the best products and which is the best people to sell it to. And that kind of stuck on my mind even after when I got from university. So I wrote my final thesis about understanding these differences between people. So my thesis also became my book, which is Use of Psychometrics in Human Resource Management, especially in recruitment. And turns out that 80% of Fortune 500 companies are already using some form of psychometric tests in their recruitment process. So you go to a Fortune 500 company, they would put you through some kind of temperamental test to find out what your natural gift is and how can you align it with the companies, because they were finding out that the turnover was really huge. People didn't want to do the job that they were recruited to do. And that costed a lot of money to these companies, and they couldn't keep doing that. Now, psychometrics gave them an objective and impartial way of assessing their natural temperament and aligning it with a job. For example, if you're an accountant, but that's your job, not what you really want to do. And when you do your psychometric analysis, you find out that you're an extremely extrovert person who likes to go out, meet people, like to have change. And when you match it with the accountant job, that's probably not where he's going to get the most satisfaction, because you have to sit on a table, you have to do a lot of debit credit, matching the both columns and making sure that nothing escapes your mind. And this is only like a time bomb about to go out. So before that happens, why not hire someone who's really meticulous, who can sit alone on a work desk, who's really good with numbers, really enjoy accomplishments of maintaining things, and is very organized. So that's what they found out, that once you employed people whose natural temperaments actually match their occupations, they can do wonders. And when I wrote my book, it was very well received. On ResearchGate, to this date, has been read over 14,000 times, which is kind of rare for a lot of academic research, because citations from 80% of the paper citations don't go beyond 10 or something.
Interesting.
Now, one of the things that I found out is that if I can only apply that academic knowledge to industry and generate ROI for a business. That's going to be huge. So I went to different professors. I told them, I have the technical expertise to get this out, put that in a product, and we can do some great things about that. Now, that has become, unfortunately, the sign for academia anymore, that they're not interested in industrial side of things. They're very happy, publishing papers, the bravado and the applaud, and that's it. I wanted to see things operationalized. So what I did is that, I applied those principles. I came back. So I created my own test, which is a Big Five test. I mean, it's not created the test. It was already there in English. So I coordinated with the professor. It's called Neo IP 300. It's a free test, the Big Five. And that's unfortunately one of the problems, that a lot of these tests are not available for free. And even if they are, you need a psychologist or business psychologist or someone who can explain the results. And I wanted it to be free for people, for my university. By the way, I also teach as a visiting professor at a university here in a business school. So what I did is that I coordinated with them and translated the test into my language, and I made my students do that at undergraduate and graduate levels. So what I found out, that the people who weren't performing very well from the beginning of their academics, all of a sudden when they took their test and I assigned them different learning materials, for example, for extroverts, you have field exercises, you have a task that they can go out and do, and invite people to university to learn from their experience. They were very happy. And same with the introverts, if you gave them different tutorials, books, YouTube videos, something that they can do on their own, they shined really, really well. And within 2 months, everyone was so surprised what happened to these people. The rest of the teachers thought, that's a lost battle. You cannot do anything about them. But fortunately, they shine out so much that they invited me actually to give a workshop for the rest of the faculty to teach them how does it actually work. And I thought, okay, that might be a good hope for me, that someone, after all, will listen to me. And then I did that. I made this test and applied that to the business life cycle. Now, what happens is that when you are doing business, there's only one bottom line, which is return on investment. And I don't know if I'm going to rant for longer, but I tried to just cut it short. There's this loop of infinite regression of the question why. So, for example, bringing in data engineering, which seems to be your specialty, which is why are we creating the pipelines? Well, the answer could be that we're collecting data that has been generated by the users and the computers, like different clusters and servers and things like that. Now, again, why are we collecting it? So that we can establish the facts that are on ground and make decisions that are smart based on that. Now, what kind of data are we collecting? So this, you see, this infinite loop of regression goes quite fast, quite far, and a lot of people get annoyed by that. Okay, where is the business value coming? The point is for this exercise is to tell them that if you zoom out and see the picture from like 10,000 foot view, you'll find out that there are a lot of cracks and mismatch between these departments. And one of the reasons 90% of the businesses fail, especially with the AI initiatives, is that there's a huge mismatch between leadership and engineering. I mean, not to say that they're incompetent. Actually, both of them are very competent, and that's exactly why they're very skeptic about the other side. So the engineering people are saying, "Oh, we have gotten a great tool. We have implemented that. Why is leadership not signing it off?" And leadership people are, if things are working, are these engineering people trying to create
Right.
some new problem? And this is what we're trying to tackle here at SIDA based on facts and creating behavioral and psychological pipelines based on peer-reviewed research.
Interesting. I mean, you mentioned this term psychological pipelines and behavioral pipelines on your website. Can you walk me through what exactly is that?
Sure, that's an interesting question. And most of the time when I'm asked this question, I instead of explaining and boring people, we play an interactive game here. So, for example, how many pair of shoes would you think you have? I mean, I think that's a question that wouldn't put a lot of people, not a lot of people off.
I just counted actually because I've been moving. So I have 21 pairs of shoes.
Exactly. So turns out in psychological research, you only need five things to predict the pattern of purchase, the kind of purchase, and the time of purchase of people. And for a lot of people, that might not be true, but for most people, that's true. So if you have a bell curve of all the people who are going to be buying the shoes in US or any segment that you're doing, so let's say 5 to 10% of people would be buying way less. 5 to 10% of people will be buying way more, and most people would be buying the average amount in between those. And turned out we only need to know the color of the shoes because 90% of the purchase decisions are made in colors. And we know for a fact that women tend to buy more based on color than men. The second thing is aesthetics, the shape, how modern it is, how sleek that is, how attractive that is, how it is positioned. Now, the third thing is your friends. So no matter what you do, you're going to be buying something that 5 or 4 of your friends have already done, because people generally flock together. So they get inspirations or recommendations from friends. One of the time held principles in purchase behavior is friend recommendation, word of mouth. There's nothing better than word of mouth. So if someone knows your friends, that's one key of how to peg this person for a product recommendation. Fourth is your zip code. It tells a lot more than people think that it does, because if you're living in a zip code, they don't know mostly about your neighbors, your income, your probably in some cases your education level, which is the fifth one, by the way. So if you put these things together, it's very easy to determine the life cycle. I mean, in marketing and sales, they call it the lifetime value of a customer. So in your lifetime, you probably have like 21 pairs of shoes now. So, and now if you distribute it on what kind of shoes they are, a lot of companies already know that, this person is going to likely buy this kind of shoe at this time of the year, on this date, because, he gets a paycheck on this date. Because there are 3 ways to establish facts. One is to simply ask people, what do we do at universities? You give out surveys to people and they fill the form, and then you have the information. Now, with a huge market in business sector, you don't have this luxury. No one's going to sit down and fill out your form. So what they do is they use behavioral data. So what you have done in the past, you're more likely to do that in the future if there is no problem. For example, COVID-19 excuse me, is something that is a disruptive factor. But other than that, you're probably going to do what you've already done. And that information is so widely available that it's kind of scary. For example, if you're on Twitter a lot of these websites can share your information, and there are softwares to do that. So right after you got off Twitter and go to Facebook, you will have an ad of something that you've been looking on Twitter, or the kind of conversations that you were engaging on Twitter. And that cross information sharing, cross platform information sharing is really valuable to businesses, to the point that a lot of people don't understand how scary that is. So let me talk about a paper that became a huge deal with the collaboration of Cornell and Facebook, where they analyzed the personality types of people, and then they matched it with the likes that they made on Facebook. So what they found out is that, excuse me. So what they found out is that if you know 150 likes of a person and a personality, you are able to make predictions about their future behavior better than their coworkers. So if you know 300 likes, you can do it better than their spouse. If you know 500 likes, you know them better than yourself. Themselves. So this is a very scary information from the perspective of a business user. So they can manipulate you in doing things that you unconsciously think you were prone, you were protected against. And that's something a lot of businesses leverage in this information, they leverage on that information. And the kind of behavioral pipelines that we create, we follow 3 steps. One is the segmentations. Once we have this information about you, we can segment you into the right A/B testing or marketing campaign. And then you can target you specifically for your age, your demographic, or your psychographics. It could be anything. And then finally, you can position them, the right products, in the right way, on the right time, so you're more likely to buy. So for example, if you have made a purchase decision, like you added a product in the cart and you forgot about that, or you said, I'll do it later. So 70% of the time, if you send them a reminder email within 4 hours, they're more likely to do that. If you do that in 1 day, they're still more likely to do that. But after 3 days, you'll just simply forget about that. And if you know these principles, you will definitely, boost your ROI to the point where it's going to perform a lot better than the baseline you have. But that's only some of the pipelines that we create for the users, and when they see that it's working, they have this trust that now I can really see the connection between psychology and data science.
It's really interesting. What was I just reading the other day? You've read Robert Cialdini's Influence, the book?
Oh yeah, I know. I think we're connected on LinkedIn as well.
Yeah. He just I think had a new edition of it, so it just came out a bit ago. But yeah, I find that book interesting. It sort of overlaps sort of what you're talking about, where there's the principles of just I guess how to influence behavior, but then automating that. So walk me through the engineering piece of that, though. Like how often are you like slicing up data, segmenting, retargeting and so forth? Is this something that you kind of do in a batch, or is this more in a continuous online training sense? Or
yeah, I think it's a good question from the perspective that implementing this becomes a lot more harder than talking about this, and that's where the talk comes in. And how we do that is the infrastructure basically is already there. So engineering teams are doing a great job of getting from Kafka, Hadoop, or whatever you have into the data lake, and then from there to Databricks or wherever your analytical platform is, and then give access to different teams like data science teams or business analyst teams or other teams. Now, the problem is that a lot of people are sitting on the data without actually understanding that. And that's where the academic psychological knowledge comes from. So let's give you a practical example that you can probably relate to from a data engineering perspective. So once you have the Kafka Hadoop information from a customer, or let's say organizational wide. So there are 3 tiers almost. So one is the data produced by the user. Second is the health metrics and the uptime and load prediction and things like this. The DevOps people do. And the third is probably the replication of the information, making sure that it's fine with the governance and everything else. Now, a lot of people think that engineering data and the logs are only good for engineers. That means that it tells you that the uptime is good, we are meeting SLAs, the pipelines are working fine, the data is being backed up, it's secure, we have authentication factors and everything else. That should be the end of the story. Well, if you look deeper, that's not. One of the things, and the very valuable information that's created by users, is called user behavior logs. What do they do on the page? How long did you stay on the page? What features did you use? How often do you come back? And that information is being perpetually stored in the organizational database or system or data lake, wherever. Now, the problem is that when data science teams pull this information, they only pull the information that's generated by the users in the section where they have filled out a form or they use a service or anything else. They don't understand that the user logs are also valuable information. So let me give you a concrete example here. Now, if a user comes on the website and generates data, so let's say we have millions of people visiting your website and they've created logs, of course. Now, there's a distribution of how they interact with the website. So let's say one of the metrics is that they navigated to page 1, from page 1 to page 10 in 5 seconds. Another user navigated in 3 seconds, because let's assume there's lots to read, and there's a lot of checkboxes and things like this. So whatever process it takes you from page 1 to page 10, you completed that in 5 seconds, and other people have 4 seconds. And we have numerous data points for millions of customers. Now, what people ignore is that there's a scientific research evidence, a paper written that says that response time and the IQ are correlated with each other. So if you have a higher IQ, you're going to navigate that page faster. And that's the only thing that you would need to establish someone's IQ. And by the way, on the side note, let me tell you how IQ works. A lot of people are confused, how it works. I think you're a member of the Mensa as well, no?
It's muted. Yeah, back when I was younger. Yeah, so
exactly.
Yeah, and I've taken a lot of these tests in the past. So
generally, the smartest people in universities are people studying mathematics and physics and statistics as well. So how do we actually establish that from the behavioral data instead of making them do the tests or giving them a lot of questionnaires? So once we have this data, we make a bell curve of the behaviors. And since we already know from the research that smart people have faster response times, so on top 10%, people who have completed the navigation from page 1 to page 10 faster, these are people who are more likely to have the higher IQs. And then we have people who are the lowest on the IQ one. You can correlate with them and see, what is the difference between their response times in milliseconds or seconds. And then you can establish, okay, that's real. And if that repeats over a long time, you can almost be certain that that's true, that these people are of high IQ. Now, what do we know about high IQ people? There are 5 different ways in which we differ from each other. And that's from a big 5 personality perspective. There are other perspectives, to give a disclaimer, but then this test has been validated and researched over 70 years now. The American Army started that in 1915 to find out what people would be appropriate for what department. And ever since then, that has become the industry standard in many ways. There are different versions of that, but basically what it does is that it classifies people in 5 different domains. So for example, one of the difference between you and me is probably skin color, the height, the bone density, the bodily structure, and genotype information. Now there is another difference, which is the temperamental difference. So I might like ice cream, you don't. You like hockey, I might like cricket or something else. But then how do you establish these temperamental differences so that it becomes valuable information? So they found out that there are 5 different ways in which we can differentiate people. One is the openness in experience, openness to experience, and then you have conscientiousness, like if you start something, you persevere or not, or you give up things and do start so many things. And then you have extroversion. That means your tendency to feel better with other people, in comparison to doing things on your own. And then you have agreeableness. So if you prefer people over you, and you have this sense of sacrificing yourself, that is agreeableness. And then you have neuroticism, which should actually be called emotional stability and not neuroticism. It gives wrong connotations. But basically, there are these five aspects in which people are different from each other. And you don't actually have to give people tests to find this out. People like to think that they're unique, they're smart, they're intelligent, but on general level, they're very similar to each other. And once I studied this, I was writing my book on that as my master's thesis. I found out it doesn't matter which culture you go to, which race and ethnicity you're talking to. People in general have very similar patterns. So in summers, what I did is, I had a summer job, and then I traveled backpacking Europe, different countries, learning different languages, talking to people, working there for a little bit, and found out that
Sounds fun.
it was actually. So I found out that a lot of these people, they have two things to offer, and that's on a global level. That's probably how word works. You have something to offer, and you have a need that someone else can fulfill. And I thought if I could match these two together, then I think everyone would find benefit in that. And when you use psychological principles in data pipelines and try to predict which people have the tendency to provide the information or good or service to other people or a region, then that becomes a good business model. And this is exactly what I try to do with the data engineering. Instead of asking people questions, you look at their behavior patterns, and if these behavior patterns are substantiated over time, then we're pretty sure that they belong to this segment or target, and then you position them in the right way. And once you do that, I think no one would deny a service that they actually need. Their friends are already using. It's aesthetically pleasing. It's colorful, and it promotes your status in terms of education and everything else. I think you would be very, your judgment is very murky if you don't want a service like that.
Interesting. As an aside, like so you mentioned these behavioral assessments, is it similar to kind of, I don't know too much about these, but I've taken like a Myers-Briggs before, that kind of assessment. Are these what you're talking about kind of similar?
Yes,
Okay.
Myers-Briggs was a very good attempt, actually. That is based on a famous German psychologist. What was the name? Carl Jung. Happens to be one of my favorite. And he proposed the different dimensions in which people can fall into.
Hmm.
And then Isabel and I forget the name of the daughter, or something, Myers, in US actually built on that task, and they created their own version to hire nurses in the wartime to find out, if we could find the best people for nursing. And from that point on, they started working on that. Now, it's a very good test, but certainly not recommended for scientific use. It has certain benefits, but people have moved on to Big Five for good reasons.
Got it. Yeah. I mean, when I took it, I was like, I guess that it makes sense, but I think for when you get your result, you sort of overfit your personality, and then it almost works backwards. Like, oh, I got this. Like I came out as an ENTJ, so but now all of my behavior kind of overfits towards that yeah, description, so to speak. Sort of like an
Yeah.
IQ, right? So you get an IQ score, and then you're like, oh well, obviously I all my behavior fits towards a score, and not in reverse, where your score is more indicative of your personality traits and whatever genetic gifts you happen to have, right? So I always find these assessments interesting in terms
I
of
think
how
it's a
you.
very astute observation because a lot of people have researched these changes and outward expression of what you thought your personality was. So, for example, there are two things that you need to know in life for the most part to find out what you want to do in life and what would actually match with your natural gifts. One is definitely your IQ, the speed at which you can learn information. Sorry, Anna, I totally forgot the last time I was talking about how you make IQ tests. It's very simple. So you make 10 questions that requires abstract thinking. It's not like you have given people information like they can see themselves. They have to
Right.
think they're in their head. Make 10 questions, and then let's say that we have 100 question bank, and then you take 10 questions out of them, give them to a population of, no matter who, like hundreds of people or thousands of people. Now rank order them with the right scores, and then you give them the next 10 questions, rank order them again, and then you give them all the questions one by one. And once you've rank ordered them by accuracy, just adjust that for the age and the gender if you want to. And that gives you your IQ score. That's it. There's nothing complicated about that. So don't assume that only IQ score is going to get you where you want to be.
Right.
The second thing is the temperament, which is the big 5 personality test I'm talking about. That actually matters a lot in how do you carry forward this IQ into life. So a lot of people are genius, but they're evil genius. So it's not like they're using it for productive use, and there's no correlation or scientific study that suggests that all smart people are going to do right things. Actually, there's a fairly understandable evidence that it's opposite. Then there's agreeableness and conscientiousness also. For example, workplace success is predicted is highly correlated with conscientiousness. That means that if you persevere in your work, if you do things over a long time, doesn't matter what your IQ is, you're probably going to beat everything else if you have the high perseverance in your context. So these are the 2 things that you actually need in order to find your way in your life. And what I've found out that when you give this information, and I'm surprised why a lot of schools and organizations don't use that, because in Scandinavia, they're already doing that in high school. So people take a gap year, they do these tests, try to find out who they are, and then they match it with the study program that they're going to study. And there's no surprise that Scandinavian entrepreneurship beats everything else. So huge companies come from there: H&M, IKEA, Volvo. There's a culture of coming up with new ideas, and then governmental support and infrastructure to actually take it to the new level. And we help a lot of startups these days also, helping them find out their vision, how their product actually fits the market, develop a strategy that they're going behind, and make sure that they do the right steps in the right order, and make sure that they find out the market response before they actually lose a lot of money. It's a very interesting field.
Mm-hmm. It seems like a sort of a bottomless pit, really. And then, of course, you have, I would say we can talk about ethics and bias in a second, because I think that's sort of the elephant in the room right now. And I know in Europe and increasingly in the United States and other countries, it's well, I mean, as an aside, like assessment testing in the US, for example, that's becoming under review right now, because I think there's some belief that SATs, for example, the test you take to get into, to kind of score how you're going to get into college, might be biased towards people who come from, more privileged backgrounds and so forth. So that's a discussion that's going on, at least in the United States right now. So it'll be interesting to see, I think, kind of how I'm interested to see also how that starts impacting other types of assessments, like Q tests, for example. Like, I think there's definitely some people in the US that feel it's I don't see a lot of people getting those anymore. I know back when I was younger, it was sort of par for the course, right? Like these sorts of assessments and intelligence tests and whatnot. And I know a lot of people with high IQs. Like one guy who mentored me, I think his registered IQ was over 175, which is kind of insane. I think he was a member of like the Mega Society, or one of those or Intertel, one of like those next level IQ societies. But it was interesting talking to him, because and that's where I came up with my observation, where I think he identified himself as being a very high IQ individual. And so everything he did revolved around high IQ activities. And so any social stuff he would do, it was always asking IQ questions of people, which was like thoroughly annoying, actually, when you talk to him, because he's just asking you these riddles, and you're like, I just want to have like a pizza and stuff. I really don't care right now.
Exactly. I mean, I don't know if you have seen, probably have seen that Big Bang Theory, this Sheldon guy.
I've never watched that, actually.
No, what's wrong with you?
I don't know.
It's super fun, actually. So these physicists, really high IQ guys, are working in Caltech, but they're annoying AF, because you don't have to rub, and that's where the temperamental part comes in. This is why Big
Hmm.
Five is such a huge success. That you can be smart and fast, but there's nothing in the world that can teach you not to rub that off on other people's face,
Hmm.
because that's something that you're going to lose a lot of credibility and self-worth on, because in the long run your ability to succeed depends on other people, which is
Yep.
kind of contradictory, because smart people think that they can do things on their own, which is quite correct. The problem is that you have to make alliances to do that. Why do you think that you have duos in big companies also, like
Right.
Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, and then you have Bill Gates, and who's the other guy? So there's
Paul
all this.
Allen. Yeah.
Exactly. So you all have two people to do these things together, and this is actually the problem with a lot of smart people, that they cannot find or trust people from the outside who have less IQ but more social clout. And if you find this right duo, things have start working. Otherwise, people are, I'll just have my own
Oh
pizza.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Like to your point, I mean, this individual, he was a hermit. He lived in so in the late 70s, he dropped out of society. I think he was a professor over at University of Rochester over in New York, and then got a school bus because he thought the economy was going to collapse from inflation in the 70s. So he moved to rural Wyoming, like the middle of nowhere. Converts a school bus. To his credit, he felt like oil, for example, was evil, and so he powered everything with solar. This is back in the late 70s, early 80s. Built a solar powered car, all this stuff. But he lived alone. I think he was the kind of person who couldn't deal with people. I met him randomly in a bookstore when I was like 14 or something in this small town, and he gives me a floppy disk with his book on it, and he's like, "Why don't you read this?" And and I thought that was interesting, so we developed a good relationship. But I saw like his um his high IQ, it worked against him. And to a large degree because he didn't have that social component, right? It was impossible for him to collaborate with people to any extent. I mean, I helped him to distribute his book online back in the early 90s, back when that, uploading it to bulletin board services, but he couldn't function at all with people. But then I've seen other people who I think don't have anywhere near genius level IQ or anything close, but they've been highly effective in their careers because they've been able to collaborate with people, been able to lead teams. And I think just have a really good social like EQ and social IQ as well, where that's not measured on standard IQ tests, but these people are just highly, highly effective. In terms of just getting people to work with them. And I think, if I were to center on one thing, it would probably be, as Warren Buffett said, in investing, anything over 130 IQ, you can just throw out the other points. You don't need them. And just, focus on, developing relationships and other things. So it's an interesting
Yeah, I think
balance.
it's spot on, because if you look at the number 130, that's to be on second standard deviation, which is
Hmm.
like only 2%, or 1 point some people are there, and that's already way small population than you would really need. You need just smart enough people to do that. And to your point about being alone, I think it's very common throughout the history. Smart people need that alone time. Look at Nietzsche. He spent his life alone. Had his physical problems. Stephen Hawking's. All these people, especially in academia, it's quite true. And if you were to take the normal assessment that American Psychological Association recommends, which is of lately quite low standard at irrelevance,
Mm.
but then a lot of these people they have to write papers, they have to think about things, they don't have time for going out making a relationship with people, which certainly does not give them an intellectual boost in their careers, which is probably of the utmost importance for them. And if you look at that, and one of the way out of that, luckily, I think Stephen Hawking wouldn't be recognized if it wasn't for his wife. So relationships are a very good way if you can find someone who believes in you and sticks with you and
Can
helps you
tolerate you.
throughout.
It's
Exactly.
so hard.
And navigate through the socially awkward situations that you love to create. Then you have a flying chance of doing something worthwhile in their life. But that's not to exclude them. It's just like they cannot help it. It's just like that's how I am.
Yeah. Yeah, I know my wife, like, bless her heart, she has to save me from a lot of situations. So, if you ever watch Curb Your Enthusiasm, the
I think
American
so.
television show, yeah, the audience out there, yeah, might know. But anyway, I find myself acting like the main character quite a bit, Larry
I
David.
do understand that's typical Utah line, bless your heart. Actually saw a Comedy Central episode about that, when your conservative parents are helping you or thinking that you're silly, they say, oh, bless your heart. Sorry.
So kind of turning the discussion to AI and machine learning. I mean, where do you see the field going in AI and ML with respect to behavior?
It's very interesting, actually. If you look at the core, it's all based on psychology. It's not like people are using ML classification models or regression models or anomaly detection out of no reason. They're trying to find out a problem that they can automate so that humans don't have to do that. And everything that they're trying to simulate that humans are doing is the reason that they're doing is to understand how humans work. Because otherwise, they were simply blindfolded belief in the output results of ML and AI models, but that's not true. So what they do is that, and they instead use problems that are unstructured, and normally human beings use that to convert that into a structured problem. For example, why do we think that neural networks is a breakthrough? I mean, it's not a breakthrough in the sense that it simply understands the unstructured problem and then find a way to put that in an equation and then give out the results. People find that accuracy is boosted. It's doing great work. There's a great business use case at that. But if you look deep into that, it's not doing anything new. It's just only finding information that was already there. So
Right.
we knew that for a long time. It was sort of like 1865 or something or later that people thought about regression analysis, and then they have different versions of that, lasso and ridge regression and things like this.
Mm-hmm.
So we had all this algorithm already there. The problem is that they didn't know how to fix the nonlinear problems, and that has
Yeah.
that has toiled physicians for a long time, like people in physics. Sorry, I didn't think physicians and physics is a different thing. So what they did is that they're trying to find out how the particle moves. Is it a wave or anything else? They have double slit experiments, and then they found out if there is only an equation. When I was studying physics, they were so hung up on laws of thermodynamics and fluid velocity and things like this. And all what I could understand that what they were trying to do is trying to understand if there is any way at all that can predict the movement of any particle through a mathematical set of equations. And these equations would predict the nonlinear nature of these particles. And the breakthrough is the nonlinear part of that, because if you talk about only the ML algorithms, they've already been there. It's not like they have become more sophisticated with the computing power, with the storage power, and with the ability to work on cloud and things like this, and putting everything together in a hyper parallel manner in which you can use a lot more computer power than you would have at home. That's not a breakthrough. The breakthrough is the nonlinear equation that helps us understand patterns in unstructured data when they're converted to structured data, so that we're able to predict better. And I think that's something that field has to think more about. But that spawns another problem, which is a huge problem. And that problem is the problem of explainability, fairness, and bias.
Big time.
Because once you have higher data, and then since you work in academics, if there's someone who has done research work, they do understand that the only thing that comes out of good paper is to be able to explain the pattern. So there are 3 levels of research, by the way. We're actually trying to break that mold and create a 4th roof. Well, I said 3 are there. One is to establish an observable phenomena. So for example, we talk about sales of ice creams in summers. So it's your hunch that there are sales going up, but you don't know if that's true. So what you do is you go out, ask different vendors, how much is a sale? Or if you're a distributing company, you know for a fact that they're ordering more and more. So that's the first stage. You've established that that's true. It's not a hunch. The second is you explore why is that happening. So is that there's a new influx of people? Is there people tend to eat more ice cream generally in summers? Are there more children? Are there any specific areas where they're eating more and there are other places are not? So you explore the data. And at the third stage, which is probably the pinnacle of research, which is why we do all these things, is the predictive part of that. So all business advantages come from being able to predict things before they happen and capitalize on that. I mean, if Apple wasn't there, do you think there would be a room for a company like this to this date? Of course not. People would have come up with something and, would eventually be the same point. So it's just like they capitalized on the need that market has, and then you build a good product, marketed it, align it with the people's usage, and then there they are, one of the few companies that has marked the market cap of 1 trillion. Now, that's the same thing with the prediction. So if you are able to see the patterns before time, that gives you an intelligent advantage. And when you have the intelligent advantage, you are able to make good decisions. And when other people, now you link it to the IQ section. Now, people lower down the bell curve, they're going to catch up soon that, this thing is happening or probably should get there. And then they're going to get to that information that you have already created because you could see things coming before. And then, you're going to become rich because of that. And that's exactly what people do in stock markets. They know where things are going. They have the technical and fundamental analysis, and then they connect it with the market information outside. They make purchase decisions, and once that phenomena happens, which you predicted happens, they're going to make out like a bandit because of that, because they could see it before that. Now, we wanted to make a whole new level, which is the 4th level, and I'm trying to do that. Hopefully, it's going to turn that way, which is to even before you are predicted that, because by the time you publish that, you predict that, and the data is there's a phenomenon that's happening in the people through the grapevine or psychological patterns or centuries old folk wisdom. And that's where conservative people shine a lot, because there are truths that hold true no matter what time, what age is that. So, for example, there's a Maslow's hierarchy. So there's basic needs, food, shelter, and then you have belonging and higher needs, self-awareness needs. Now you have to, if you're selling a product, you need to put that in different pyramid levels. So where does my product fit in? If you're selling food, you're not going out of business unless you do something really stupid or people try to change something new in terms of culinary taste. And if you know these ideas and you make pipelines out of that, even before you have the data. So imagine if you have the data and you're trying to predict something, you would need data for that. But what if you have, these societal changes and movements that before even the data comes? That is something that's going to give you a unique possibility to actually hone on this information.
Interesting. So you're sort of preempting things then.
That's the nature of business, actually. All good businesses preempt information. Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. So kind of inverting the question then, where would this break?
I'm sorry, what would break?
Where would this not work?
A lot of situations in which information is not reliable, not regular, and you don't have enough data.
Okay.
Because what happens is that if you have a structured problem, and that's a very smart question, because that is relating to a new concept that's emerging in AI and machine learning science, which is if you do not have reliable information, enough information, and regular information, you get into a problem which data scientists call the drift. So it can be data drift, it could be model drift. So it's not like the data has changed, but your concept or your KPIs about the data change. So there are 2 examples. So if you have a data distribution from a certain demographics, people are visiting your website in a certain time between 9 in the morning and 9 in the evening, all of a sudden that inverse, and that it's only 9 p.m. to 9 a.m. And now you're already worried what's happening. So if you already have a pipeline created that gives you alerts that there's unusual traffic, that they can probably think of it as a spam and shut down servers or requests from the website. But if you know why is that happening, you would be able to actually pinpoint that. But now that you know that there's a public holiday, there's a Christmas or something, people are more likely to stay up and use internet on the odd times. For a fact that now your way of perceiving that data has changed. The computer pipelines are dumb. They're not smart people. They don't know that people are having Christmas. They're going to give you alerts that that's not usual. the distribution are not usual. But you need to make sense of the data, and that would be something that's called data drift. So now, you have totally different data from what you usually have. And if you're not careful about understanding that data, that's going to create a problem. Another problem is the model drift, that your model has been good for some while, but with new data it becomes stale. You already have to come with new data and make new models for that. The freshness of data is very important. I was talking to Prashant, who is the VP of H2O, and he actually coined a lot of good terms when it comes to the big data, the velocity, veracity. I think veracity is the part where he actually introduced the new one, which actually means that the data that you have is not going to be good forever. So you have to actually make sure that your KPI change according to that. And the data drift and the model drift are two things that have kept data scientists up at night, because that would disturb all the foundations that they have for their predictions and their hypotheses. And it's a very complicated thing. And this is exactly why it's so hard to explain to leadership that AI initiatives and machine learning initiatives work, but the science involved in that is so fickle, and the target is a moving target, that it becomes too complicated for them to remember. They come from a preservation mindset. Engineering people come from an innovation mindset, and bridging them, it's not for the faint-hearted, let's put it that way.
Yeah, I could see that. That's interesting.
What's your experience been, if I may ask, working with the leadership and what you do at your company? Has it been easy internally working with clients and explaining them how it works?
I mean, I think it depends. We sort of pre-qualify customers, so they have to be coachable. That's like one criteria, right? So we work best when we're able to work alongside teams and teach them the skills that they need. So we're not really a body shop per se, right? So I think that sort of filters out, I think, a lot of the people who would be a bad fit. So if you don't want to learn something from us, right, or engage with us in that manner, then there's probably a bunch of other companies you can go hire that you could just, do button share hours and time materials and stuff. So we really do, I think, pre-select the types of companies that we want to work with. So it's a bit biased in that way, right? Where you're only going to work with us if you have a willingness to learn. But we like that, and we like working with leaders. But that said, we still find leadership in a lot of cases where it's rarely our problem is rarely technological, in the sense where, like, data pipelines, as you point out, they're dumb. You can build them, you can destroy them, you can recreate them. That's not a big deal. Most infrastructure is pretty stupid as well, right? These are inert objects. They move data around, but at the end of the day, translating that value is still can still be a bit of a challenge, right? And so it's a matter of how you frame the discussion. And so we've learned things like, don't talk about things like data quality, for example. That technical terms put people to sleep. Talk about it in ways that people can understand, right? So yeah, if you're talking about Kafka, or column data stores or whatever, or feature stores to an exec, CEO, it's not really going to make any sense. You focus on describing outcomes, inputs and outcomes, right? Incentives, that kind of thing. That said, I mean, I have had the pleasure of working with a couple of CEOs who I felt were actually the most technical of any of the people in the company, including their CTO, which was surprising. When we were interviewing one company, and we were interviewing the CTO or the CEO, and I had to double check. I was like, this is the right person, right? Because he had actually a higher technical grasp of everything than any of his engineers did, which was amazing. But he's also a very competent CEO, like among the best I've ever seen. So he's just a really rare individual that we just happen to be lucky to talk to, basically. There's no way you could replicate that person. That's just not a skill set, kind of like yours, where it's just like what your skill set isn't something that's just like a standard curriculum in the university. It's sort of you wound up here partly randomly, probably, and like partly because it's just something you found things that interest you and you kept going that way, right? Where you persevered in directions that seemed interesting. And so, but leadership is very, I would say, like communicating. The areas I see technical people fail is that they don't have the empathy to kind of cross over the bridge. And really, it shouldn't be like this gap. Really, in a business, I think that's working well, that gap, I think, is artificial. Like everyone's focused on a mission and an outcome that's clearly communicated from leadership. And then you just work in respective areas and try and accomplish that. But all too often that gets lost in translation at a technical, and I would say at a business level. There's this weird, I would say it's a dichotomy, and it's almost a false dichotomy, but it exists between business and engineering. And it's just kind of how it is. But it's a self-reinforcing dichotomy as well, because then technical people like us, we talk about, well, the business needs to understand this, right? And so you're already identifying them as the other. And then they say, well, the engineering team, technology, right, is the other part. And so so part of our job is just figuring out how to translate things in a way that's easy to digest, and I think easy, explainable in a couple sentences that are not jargon heavy, and just get your point across. And so a lot of my work nowadays is like, I think figuring out how to communicate better with executives and engineering people too. So it's interesting, like your skill set, my skill sets, I think become, I would say, interesting and unique in that way. So,
Yeah, I think it's very rare to actually have both skills like you have. And I really like that part of your website where you actually pre-qualify every company that is
yeah,
intending to contact you. Is that, well, that's what we do. And if that's not something we want, you're probably to save us both a lot of time if you
yeah,
don't. And I think it's a part of that we also espouse in our work is that we
mm-hmm.
choose clients based on what we want to do and what they're looking for. And then there's a good rapport between us. And this is why we have got long queues, like 2 months before we actually take new clients. But even with those clients, we were very selective, because in the long run, I found out that it's always been a problem. If you take clients just because
Yeah.
you want money or something, you definitely don't want that money. Trust me.
No, and what we do also is we look at Glassdoor ratings for a company, and we actually look at Glassdoor reviews from employees. Now, I know there's an axe to grind with employees that post negative reviews because they're obviously pissed off about something. But if you start seeing common themes in why people are upset, this kind of gives you an indication of whether or not this company is going to be great to work with or just not even worth your time. Because money at this point, I would say, like, we get business coming in all the time. Like, it's not a problem for us. The issue is which clients are where are we going to have success? Are we going to like working with the client, which I think also indicates outcomes? Like, are we going to have a great outcome? Great outcomes happen when we enjoy working with clients. Right? I would say
Mhm.
if there's animosity every step of the way, like, that's just a crappy situation for everybody. And like, why would you want to do that to
Oh, been there,
yourself?
done that. I know.
Right? Yeah, it sucks. So just avoid it. I mean, your
Us.
life's too short and your time's too precious. Like, don't spend it with it. The other thing we're doing right now is we're trying to, make a lot of automate things. So courses, materials, that kind of stuff, where we can just offload a lot of the knowledge to people. And if you want to pay for at least a base level of knowledge, go for it, or just go watch our free videos or something. Right. So we're trying to scale the knowledge piece doing that versus, and consulting will inevitably be reserved for people who I think are a good fit and can pay for it. And if you're not a good fit, I would say the money doesn't matter, because, like I said, that's easier to come by, I would say, than like people who are going to preserve your sanity. So,
That's for sure. And I think you made a very good point that a lot of businesses and leaders don't understand these days is that, when you create knowledge and value, I mean, for us, we create it through podcasts and articles and interacting with other leaders. But when you do that and people see the value in that, then it's a good chance that when they contact you, they've already read your work and, they see
exactly.
you create value, and then they, you have a good chance of working with them. But if you are just, selling out things using reuse articles and you haven't established what you know, then that becomes a problem for both of
Mm-hmm.
you to move forward. And this is why, I'm a huge fan of your podcast with Matt,
Thanks.
and you giving a very good information about engineering, because there's a lot of confusion with people. Because I don't know, tell me your view on that also, but I have noticed that a lot of people from different domains, all kind of disciplines, are moving towards data science and data engineering, because it's probably
Mm-hmm.
becoming a very easy, it's one of the, quote unquote, sexiest job. So people are actually looking into it, what to do with that, but they don't know where to find right information, where to start, who are the reliable people to actually get started with it. And the good part about your podcast is that you give a lot of resources. You talk about the concrete issues that they're going to be facing once they're employed in bigger organizations. And what has your experience been? People reaching out to you and finding information. Do you see any patterns?
Yeah, I do. Because I've been in data science for a really long time. I've been doing machine learning, geez, like 11, 12 years now, or probably more if you count other things. But and so but what I noticed back in the day, like there wasn't a lot of information on machine learning. There was Tom Mitchell's book. I think there's elements of statistical learning, and that was, you had to read my books. All of a sudden, there was a lot of material on data science and machine learning, and I think that with a growing amount of information, started the quality of information started going down because everyone's jumping in, right? And so there's still a lot of great stuff, obviously, and I think that rises to the top, but there's filtering through good information and bad information, which has got a lot harder for people. And so that's a lot of questions that I get about data science and data engineering too. Data engineering, there's just a lot less information on it right now, I think. Starting to be. And I think ML ops is the same way. ML engineering, there's starting to be more information, but it's just curating information is so hard right now. Like, how do you separate a vendor pitch article versus something that's actually legitimately useful? Not saying vendor pitches aren't useful, but it's like that's there might be some information there, but it might be kind of low calorie information. So it's hard. It's really hard. And so I guess for us, we just try and focus on kind of non BS, just high quality information, but I think keep it really candid. But yeah, it's hard. What are you finding?
Yeah, I think you're spot on with the fact that the missing piece of puzzle is how does that vendor page connect with a user's problem, and that's where you come in. You dissect the situation, how to create the whole architecture of the company. Would that be better for them? What do we use? We use Cockroach DB. We use Cassandra. Why do we use that? Do we really need that latency time? What's the throughput? How is the system going to work with each other? Is it going to be working with the LDAP or not? So that's a very complicated landscape for a lot of people who are just stepping into that ocean. And when you talk about these things, people do understand that, okay, now I do understand how does that information fit in with the possible use cases in the company. And that creates a lot of value for a lot of people. And this is why people listen to you, and the people. And my experience has been the same. I get a lot
Right.
of LinkedIn messages every day.
I'm sure.
Asking them. So actually, on my website, I went ahead and made a Dropbox folder for people. And okay, this is all the information, so I don't have to reply to the individual emails and message all the time. So go ahead and
Makes sense.
find out the right use cases with white papers and things like this, so that people at least have some starting point to go with. Because a lot of companies, I don't know if that's this is your European experience, but a lot of companies, what they're doing, that they're using all the repurposed content and reposting them and putting them in a package and asking people to pay money for the same content that has already been out there.
Yeah.
And I think someone has to do that. But then again, when you do that, do create some value. Just align that with the business case and the needs of the person that's coming to you. Give them some interactive exercises, have some conversation with them, find out their problems. Like Andres are doing great work when he's coaching people about data engineering.
Yep.
Heard your last episode about where he's helping a client who's working for government, finding out and exploring some infrastructure issues. So that's real help. So if that's what you can do, great. But just respect your time and their time when you're giving out content.
Yeah, I mean, you don't need to be like charging $500 to do like a linear regression class. I mean, there's like a million linear regression classes at this point, right? Like, move up the value chain, and I think create good content around stuff that's more impactful. And I think you got a great audience on LinkedIn and YouTube, and I think other places as well. And it's like, so we both get, both of us get messages from people a lot, and it's just, I'd say, and the thing I tell people too is put in the hard work. Just like learn how to learn how to dig for information. This is how you become good. Like, just taking the easy way out and kind of doing what everyone else is doing is not going to get you to a great spot in your career. Like, you become great because you did great stuff, which means you put in like a lot of hard work, did different stuff, made some mistakes, probably made a lot of them, and that's my approach, at least. Because I think data science, it's one of those things where it's sexy, therefore everyone wants to get into it. I think a lot of people don't want to put in the hard work, though. That's my observation. They just want to be called a data scientist.
Yeah, a lot of people, and picking from your point that people want to put a lot of hard work in that, and I think I see data science in a very different light. I'm sure there are other people they do also, but I seem to be the only and crazy vocal one, which is that data science is not only for the problems that you face at your workplace or solving some kind of environmental issues or whatever data set you have. It also helps you understand yourself and finding out your own behavior patterns in life. So, for example, I was talking to Ganesh Kesari. He's a contributor to Forbes and chief decision scientist at Grameener, a wonderful company. They're doing great work. And he was talking about the fact that he has 120,000 data points of his own life for the past 4 years, and he logs down all of his information to the 15-minute point. And that's a gargantuan task to do that. But what I'm trying to say is that if you read your own behaviors and make decisions, what takes you, what makes you happy, what makes you sad, what makes you discouraged, what encourages you, what gets you going, and you align that with what you're doing and what you want to learn and where you want to be, and do the reverse engineering from what do you want to be in life, and then reverse engineer that from the point where you are at the moment. People will call it, the cognitive behavioral therapy or DBT or whatever, but that's exactly what it is. I don't see the dissociation of sciences and social sciences, because if we have gotten to this path of converting unstructured problems into structured problems, why can't human behavior be a structural problem? It's quite linear. We know from personality psychology that people work in similar ways no matter where they live. So that the research is cross-cultural, cross-country, multicultural sample, multi-gender samples, multi-age sample. And if all of that has some correlation, why is that we cannot convert these problems into real life?
Yeah, these are great thoughts. That's a good point. Well, cool. I have to actually jump to a meeting right now.
Sure.
It's so good having you on. I love talking to you. Love to have you on again at some point, or maybe I can be on your show and invite myself on. So, but yeah, I really like what you're doing. I think it's a great conversation. And for people who want to learn more about you, where can they find you?
Sure. I have two websites. One is the company one, Cider.co. I'm going to be giving you the links. You can put it in the description. And if you want to know about my own work, it's minhaaj.com. That's my name. Pretty straightforward. And you can reach out to me through those mediums. Also, I'm on LinkedIn and other social media. Just feel free to drop me a line, and would love to get to know you. And thank you so much for having me on the show. And definitely, we'll get you on our show also, so we have longer time. I don't know if that gets you bored or not, but
That's fine, man. I love these conversations. So yeah, we'll just have to figure out something with the time zone and whatnot, but we'll make it work out. So awesome.
yeah,
Well, have a good
thank
night.
you so much.
Yeah. See you,
Thank
man.
you.
All right, take care. Bye.
Bye.